Food. That's what most of the world works hard to produce. And the hard work promotes fitness. Simple tools and techniques take effort. They help burn up the food energy they provide. What isn't burned up immediately is stored as a fuel reserve. It's stored in the form of body fat to be mobilized and used if the food intake drops. Feasting today helps the body deal with famine tomorrow. That's the eating pattern with which we all evolved. But now in the Western world, we've upset the balance. There are all kinds of pressures distorting our eating habits. For one thing, fashion may force some people to be too thin, unnaturally, sometimes even dangerously thin. On the other hand, because we now produce more food with less work, most of us are overfed and underexercised. Too fat or too thin means trouble. Changes in the balance between energy intake and output reshape the body over a lifetime. A baby's main activities are sleeping and eating. Low output, high intake. The result? Baby fat. In adolescence, both intake and output are high, but so much energy goes into growth that little is stored as fat. Later, activity drops, and unless intake drops as well, or output is kept up with exercise, fat is stored. Middle age spread. Finally, old age brings lowered appetite and activity. Fat stores may wither or get redistributed. Fat thins out just under the skin, causing surface collapse and wrinkles. In our society, most people want to be slim, but too many seem pound foolish and far from calorie wise. A calorie is a measure of heat, of energy. Food energy can be released by metabolism or by burning. The bomb calorimeter is used to determine the heat potential in any one kind of food. A metal cylinder is placed over a food sample that's been carefully weighed. A thermocouple will measure the temperature change within the bomb when the sample is electrically ignited and burns in oxygen. The food's capacity to provide energy can then be calculated in calories. The calories come originally from solar energy trapped by growing plants. Plant-eating mammals repackage the energy as meat and milk, sources of protein and fat. Plant-produced fats, usually oils, have molecules called unsaturated, with fewer hydrogen atoms than the solid, saturated animal fats. Saturated fats are involved in heart disease, especially in the fat-clogged blood vessels of atherosclerosis. Fruit and vegetables provide carbohydrates, starches, and high-energy sugars, which the body stores in the form of fat. Most human diets lack the variety we've come to expect. Most are simple, starchy, monotonous. Famine is rarely far away, and feasts are few. In New Guinea, a pork feast is a mighty occasion. People of the Mendi come from miles around for this banquet of protein and fat. It's taken 5 years to assemble. Taking advantage of present abundance helps the body deal with future scarcity. But what if the feast goes on, and the famine never comes? In our society, it's so easy to overeat. Our food supply is abundant, reliable, and enticingly varied. We don't burn up much energy getting food or keeping warm, thanks to easy access to comfortable climates down south or in our heated homes. The result? An epidemic of obesity, with increased danger of heart disease, diabetes, gallstones. We may be killing ourselves with calories. For most, too many, but for some, too few. This is one extreme. Anorexia nervosa, a relentless pursuit of excessive thinness, a psychological disorder known only in affluent societies, and 90% of anorexics are girls, some of whom reach the point of starving themselves to death. In between the extremes, what's too fat or too thin? How do eating patterns vary in other species and in other societies? A traditional Eskimo diet is high in fat, so why don't Eskimos gain weight? They burn the fat away, keeping warm, making up for food shortages. Their fat-rich diet stems from animals adapted to Arctic life. The harp seal's body is streamlined and buoyant, thanks to a thick, insulating layer of blubber just under the skin. It keeps the animals warm, especially the young. Small bodies lose heat more rapidly than large ones. And when a nursing mother doesn't take time to eat, the fat will feed the metabolic fires that sustain life and warmth. Desert animals may also carry fat reserves to see them through periodic food shortages. The camel stores fat in the hump on its back. Concentrating fuel reserves in one place keeps the rest of the body thin, speeding up heat loss and helping to keep the camel cool. The Nuer live in the desert heat of the Sudan. Their distinctive body shape is a result of extremely scant reserves of fat. Here, evolution has given up the stockpiling of energy in favor of bodies that lose heat rapidly. For most people, gaining weight means filling out fat cells whose number grows larger the more we eat in childhood. Usually, by the time of puberty, their number is set for life.
I am known as Sweet Marie, the youngest fat girl on exhibition today. I weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces when I was born. Now I weigh 723 pounds. I measure 28 inches right around here, and I measure more just above my knee than the average woman does around the waist. I'll raise my dress.
In the massively obese, fat cell multiplication zooms out of control. Everyone has cells that can develop into fat storage cells. They're called fat cell precursors, and such cells from the massively obese are being cultured at the University of Toronto. David Lau is working on a project headed by Dr. Dan Roncari.
Using the cell culture system, we found that fat cell precursors from massively obese persons replicate at an exaggerated rate in culture. And this was very interesting because we could reproduce this after the cells had subdivided several times. So the problem seems to be inherent in the cells and may reflect the operation of genetic factors.
So for the extremely obese, the tendency to have too many fat cells may be built in and independent of youthful overeating. A chance to study the later effects of childhood eating arose out of one of the tragedies of World War II. It was in Holland near the end of the war. In the confusion of the Allied invasion and the German retreat, the Dutch were brought close to starvation. But even then, records were kept of the birth and growth of children.
The mothers who were exposed to famine at the end of their gestation period or at the time of delivery gave birth to infants who at the age of 19 had a lesser incidence of obesity than general population. And this is probably related to the fact that these infants were subjected to caloric deprivation.
Fortunately, liberation brought the famine to a swift conclusion. An airlift of food turned it into a feast, and babies born at this time had more than enough to eat.
These infants were born to the first spring of plenty, the first spring of peace. And at that time, there was abundance of food, and probably they received more food along with their mothers at the end of their pregnancy. And because of this excessive, probably excessive feeding, they developed an excessive number of fat cells.
There are psychological factors as well. Adolescent obesity is one response to the pressures of growing up in an increasingly complex, challenging world. In some children, too many fat cells are produced by early overeating, and then the stresses of adolescence create even greater appetites that fill the extra fat cells up.
In here, not at your stomach, because it's not your stomach that wants the food. If your head has made up your mind.
Now there are summer camps specifically for teenagers with weight problems. They feature restricted diets, exercise programs, and counseling. They undoubtedly boost morale and provide incentives to take off some of the extra poundage.
And when I'm thinner, like my whole personality is different. And then when I start gaining back my weight, like I'm always depressed and everything, and it's so frustrating.
I just sit in my room. I don't go out Fridays and Saturday nights. I just feel that nobody would want to be with me, not even my friends.
When I come home from school, I'll start off fighting something small, but I can't stop. I can never stop. I start off and eat, and eat, and eat.
But you've been seeing a boy who has the weight problem. And
I know, and that helped me a lot this winter. I didn't put that much weight at all.
you, in other words, you and Ronnie were supportive of you, and that helped you.
Absolutely.
Maybe you should all go out and get yourself a fat boyfriend.
The problem is, how long will all this effort be kept up? Many of these youngsters will be back next year, still fighting a losing battle.
One and up. Two more. Ready?
It's hard to reach the roots of problems with insecurities or poor self-image, but results can reinforce resolves.
Whoa.
How about 260?
Right.
12.
Permanent weight loss means lasting new attitudes, not just changing lifestyles for the summer months.
Another one, 236. How much is that? 15 pounds. And I'd like you to meet the kids who've had the highest weight losses, and they're so phenomenal I want to share them with you. Mr. Tillum and Mr. Porter, please stand up. These boys lost 15 pounds. Kim Albee, 11 pounds.
For many people, keeping trim means lowering intake, increasing output, going to the Y. Balanced diet and exercise can also tip the scales against fat-related disease, especially high blood pressure and hardening of the arteries. The effort people have been putting into fitness programs since the late 60s, all the exercise, has produced a 15% drop in heart attacks. But some people just can't keep their weight down. Until recently, nothing worked for Bill Roberts, so he volunteered to take part in a study program at the Toronto General Hospital. There, under careful supervision, he dropped his food intake to 0. When Bill entered the hospital, he weighed 350 pounds. In just 7 weeks, he lost 70 pounds.
To start, it was 800 calories a day, strictly protein. I would have egg whites in the morning, tuna for lunch, and then one night I would have chicken. The following night I would have beef tenderloin. That continued for 2 weeks. And right after this 2 weeks of the diet, I went to strictly fasting. And I fasted for 5 weeks. Nothing to eat at all, except liquid, which was only water, and I would consume about 3,600 cc's or 4,000 cc's a day.
Dr. Errol Marlis is in charge of this fasting study.
It is a very difficult kind of treatment to engage in, and frankly it's just not safe. There are a great many potential and actual dangers in total fasting. We consider it to be safe under very close surveillance in hospital by experts.
Most extreme diets have only short-lived effects and can be downright dangerous. Statistics also show that few short-term group programs have a high success rate, partly because most people who join them have already failed to stay slim on their own. While Bill Roberts' doctors rigorously monitor his health, they also study how his body utilizes its stored fat when no food is coming in.
The body has an extraordinarily effective capacity for knowing what it requires in terms of calories and measuring the number of calories that are coming in as food, and any excess gets stored as though for a rainy day, failing to recognize that in the current affluence in which we live, rainy days are less common.
The heaviest man on record was Robert Hughes, 1,200 pounds, over 6 times his ideal weight. He died young. This man weighs over 450 pounds, and neither dieting nor exercise have helped. For him, the last resort is to have his eating capacity surgically restricted, with Dr. John Palmer operating at Toronto General Hospital. There's one operation that entails wiring the jaw shut and forcing a liquid diet. This one involves opening the abdominal cavity, exposing the stomach by penetrating a 10-centimeter layer of fat, then decreasing the stomach's capacity. This staple gun will put a seam of staples across the stomach walls, leaving only a small opening through which food can trickle. This is what happens. The line of staples will create a reservoir that can hold less than a cupful of food, so only small amounts can pass through the stomach at a time. For even heavier people, the length of the small intestine may be shortened, cutting down on the absorption of nutrients into the bloodstream. But neither the stapled stomach nor this bypass can reduce a massive weight to ideal proportions. Recently, scientists have been finding out more about how cold environments affect the metabolism of food, and these new findings may offer hope to the chronically obese. It has to do with how fat helps keep the body warm. Not white fat that insulates, but another kind altogether. This line of research includes a study conducted by Dr. David Foster and Lorraine Friedman of the National Research Council in Ottawa. A rat is kept in a cold chamber for several weeks to find out how its body adapts to low temperatures. The rat's oxygen consumption is a measure of how quickly its body is burning up food. At first, the animal inefficiently produces extra heat by shivering.
After the rat has been exposed for several weeks to the cold, it stops shivering, and yet it maintains its body temperature, the normal temperature, and so it has developed a new process, apparently, of producing heat.
An efficient process. A rapid increase in oxygen consumption shows that something in the rat's body has stepped up its metabolic heat production. But what part of the body? To find out, Dr. Foster injects a tracer into the bloodstream, radioactive rubidium, in tiny plastic pellets, less than a hair's breadth across. The heat-generating tissue takes more blood in order to get the extra food and oxygen it needs. So it's in that tissue that the bloodstream concentrates the tracer. Once the injected animal is exposed to the cold, its body is dissected into different tissue types, muscle, bone, and so on, and each is tested for radioactivity. And this is where the tracer accumulates, in a tissue that rapidly enlarges in the cold, brown fat on the rat's back.
There's a very dramatic increase in the amount of brown fat. It approximately doubles in mass.
Especially in young animals exposed to cold, this heat-generating fat grows more active and burns up food to keep the animal warm. But not in this genetically obese mouse. Its brother is normal, and at the University of Ottawa, Dr. Jean Hims-Hagen has found that while the normal mouse withstands cold, the obese mouse dies at just 4 degrees Celsius, in spite of its massive insulating layer of white fat.
Brown fat is defective in the obese mouse. It does not have the normal heat-producing mechanism which is needed to combat the cold.
Every cell contains tiny bodies called mitochondria for converting food into energy. In brown fat cells, that energy is heat. But in the obese mouse, these microscopic furnaces don't work. They don't burn up the food, so it gets stored as white fat. If defective brown fat causes obesity, will active brown fat burn excess calories away? That was a question asked by the Medical Research Council of Great Britain. Its answer was sought by Michael Stock and Nancy Rothwell.
If you feed the rat almost exactly what a human eats, a very nice, a very varied and a very palatable diet, it will eat very large quantities of food.
You could increase food intake and the rat would respond not by getting obese, not by laying down fat in the body, it would respond by increasing his energy expenditure, its heat production.
At the end of one of our experiments, we killed the animals that had been fed the cafeteria diet or the ordinary diet to see if there was any difference in the amount of brown fat. And sure enough, we found about 3 times as much of this tissue in the overfed rats that had stayed lean. And it isn't just an increase in size of this tissue, but it's also a change in activity. It's more active in the animals that have the very high rates of heat production. This is just the same as you find in animals that are adapted to cold. So it seems that brown fat is important, not just in keeping you warm, but perhaps in burning off extra energy that you don't need and avoiding obesity.
Some 10 years ago, we did some experiments in London on ourselves and on college students in which we asked the students to overeat by at least an extra 1,000 calories a day to see what effect this would have on their body weight. And these experiments went on for quite a long time, 4 weeks, sometimes up to 8 weeks. And the surprising thing was that a lot of the students and ourselves managed to increase our food intake by this large amount. And we had very little effect on, it had very little effect on our body weight.
I consume what are considered by many people quite considerable amounts of food, at least 6 bars of chocolate a day in addition to all the normal food that most people eat. And I have difficulty in not losing weight rather than gaining weight. So, and many people in the general public have long suspected that there must be some other mechanism for altering body weight other than just food intake.
Is it brown fat? That's apparently what keeps human infants warm, especially premature babies. Brown fat has been found in their bodies, just as in other young animals. This heat-producing fat is active in the premature during the first weeks after birth, until feeding has time to build up white fat, baby fat, as an insulating barrier to the cold. But do human adults have brown fat?
Pathologists who've looked at bodies have found brown fat in the same areas as you find it in the rats and in the young baby. But this doesn't mean to say that it's actually active. Obviously it could be just there and not actually doing anything in the adult. And we tried to find some way of testing whether it could respond to stimulation, whether it could still be active in the adult. And what we did was to carry out an experiment on ourselves, in fact. And we took a drug which acts just like noradrenaline. It's just like the sympathetic nervous system, and it's known to stimulate brown fat in the rat. And we looked at the temperature changes after taking this drug on the back, and particularly on the back of the neck, where you might expect to find this tissue.
Infrared thermographs show that parts of the body did get warmer, just where brown fat is found in other species.
interesting that we found particularly large hotspots in me, which is perhaps interesting since I do eat a lot of food and don't get fat, therefore probably have a very high heat production. And although it's not certain yet, it seems that there may be something there in adult man that is like brown fat that you find in the rat, and perhaps this may be involved in the high rates of heat production.
There is still some dispute over the idea that brown fat warms human adults. Russian scientists say yes, and it's worth noting that their autopsy findings were based on people who had lived in the cold Soviet climate, in houses kept at a lower temperature than ours. Do our overheated buildings render our brown fat incapable of burning up the excess calories we take in? If we have brown fat, can it be safely stimulated to burn unwanted pounds away?
The question then comes, what is the cause of obesity? Because up to now, most people have been convinced and been led to believe that obesity really is just a result of gluttony, of eating large amounts of food. Now we know that there are probably just as many thin gluttons in the world as there are fat gluttons. So it suggests that obesity is not just due to eating large amounts of food, that there could be a metabolic defect, really a thermogenic defect, a problem in raising heat production in response to food. These studies do open up the possibility that we could have an alternative form of treatment for obesity, that there may be some way of stimulating the brown fat in obese people to help them lose weight. But this is a long way in the future, and certainly we don't know of any way in which we can do this in man at the moment. And so one's still faced with the problem, I'm afraid, for the obese person, that they've got to learn to live with a lower energy intake than other people around them.